Okay, so today we'll talk about the controversy of personas and discuss how our team at Spotify built an audience framework that lasts and still in use today. Thank you so much for joining. It's super cool to see so many people interested in a talk hosted by user researchers here in a design conference. My name is Luiza. I'm originally from Brazil, not from Berlin. The Berliners wouldn't let me say that I'm from Berlin. I'm just based here for the last 2 years, which is also the time I've been working at Spotify. I'm currently specializing at the audiobooks area, where I'm helping to shape the future of offerings for authors and consumers. And this is Serena.
Hi everyone, my name is Serena. I'm based in New York. I currently work at Etsy, which is a global online marketplace, but previous to Etsy, I used to work at Spotify here with Luiza.
Cool. So we structure our talk today in 2 parts. Part 1, why are personas controversial in the UX community, and the common mistakes that led to the devaluation of personas. And part 2, how to build impactful personas that last, which are our case study of applying an iterative mixed methods approach in developing user personas at Spotify's internal platform team. Okay, so I'd like to start with the question. When I say personas, how many of you think they are a helpful tool? Raise hands. Okay. How many of you think they're not that helpful? And don't be shy. I see some hands too, quite a few. And how many of you think it depends? The classic design question. Well, to my point, in the industry today, the opinions really vary. And well, we have a theory why they got controversial. So in the last 2 decades, personas became widely adopted in the design and UX community. Some companies would share how they build their personas, their persona content. We saw blogs and podcasts on the topics. We also saw it transcending design being embraced by marketers and taught in business schools. They are a representation of audience clusters, capturing major areas of overlaps in user needs, behaviors, attitudes, and goals. They make characteristics of key user segments more salient. But because they are visualized with a real person's face or a cartoon with a quirky name usually, they're also relatable, memorable, and very good in building empathy. In summary, personas got popular because they really stick. However, nowadays, many are against personas. I'm not pointing fingers back to you, but some people would argue that they are not as helpful. This happened because personas were often built incorrectly, which eventually led to this lost interest and validity from stakeholders. Many now believe that maybe they take a bit more effort to build than what they actually worth. As a side effect, we saw a rise in alternative names like mindsets, does that ring a bell? Maybe archetypes, which also draw confusion to the whole topic. But well-done personas, mindsets, and archetypes are actually very similar, and for the rest of today, we're going to refer to them as personas. But why? What common mistakes led to the decreasing trust in this research tool? Based on our own experience and conversations with peers, we believe that there are 3 mistakes that led to these inconsistent personas. They are building without stakeholders buy-in, force-feeding traditional methodologies, and failing to ensure that they are time-proof. Let's look at each of them in detail. Mistake 1, building personas without stakeholders buy-in. So this is the first common mistake, to just join a team and assume people need persona, the team needs persona, let's just do them. Or the opposite, have your stakeholders asking you to personas, and you go ahead and build without questioning. Do the due diligence first. Before picking personas or any model, work with your team to understand and determine together what is needed. The agreement between you and your stakeholders in what the team needs is what informs how you build it, how you visualize it, how you socialize it, and how you activate on it. For example, you may agree that the team needs to learn more about its users, but you may also agree that personas is not the most helpful way to visualize them. You don't want to see segments. You actually work in a way that user problem statements are the most actionable kind of visualization of your research. The mistake 2, force-fitting traditional methodologies. Often, when they get to the execution phase, well-intentioned design teams fall back on old techniques for building personas without considering research goals for their team. Too much focus on demographics is a way to do this mistake. So teams are displaying personas' age, gender, and income rather than needs, goals, and behaviors. While demographics and market segments are important for strategy, they don't inspire the development of innovative product features. Another way to do this mistake is to base your personas in qualitative data only, say a few interviews with users. This is okay, you can make this choice, but only if that's what you had agreed with your team. If your team goal is to, for example, prioritize opportunities, not being able to quantify your personas will prevent them to do so. However, the opposite can also happen. When you rely on quantitative methods only, you end up with deliverables that often don't inspire empathy or go deep enough on user needs. And the mistake number 3, failing to time-proof outputs. One common argument about personas is that they become obsolete too fast. When personas are visualizing only static outputs, not dynamic, and are not updated to evolve with the business, that happens indeed. Frozen personas, after a year or two, sometimes even shorter if the business has significantly changed, no longer reflect the landscape, and stakeholders don't want to use them anymore. The diagram here on the slide illustrates persona A, B, and C. They are accompanied by dynamic outputs based on analytics data. In this kind of output, the persona segments updates are captured on a regular basis. So you see here, September, they have different sizes, October and February. This type of output is really helpful because it helps to spot changes in the user bases that are subtle and may accrue over time. Such changes serve as a cue to gauge if it's time to revisit your personas. They may have become so small that they become irrelevant. And then you might want to add or eliminate a segment. So, I'm gonna pass on, sorry, we had a bit of, can you go back one slide? Sorry. So, oh, where are we? It's not changing there, is it? Okay. Okay, sorry. So I'll pass on to Serena now, who will show how those mistakes could have impacted our our case study at Spotify, and what we did to avoid them.
So now that Luiza's talked through some theories that we have on why personas have become so controversial in the UX industry, you might be wondering, how do we avoid these mistakes or pitfalls to actually create impactful personas that last over time? We're here to talk you through a case study where we did exactly that on our team at Spotify. So the first mistake that Luiza talked about is building without stakeholder buy-in. So we made sure to really avoid this mistake. Instead of building without stakeholder buy-in, we began with understanding our stakeholders' biggest and most pressing questions before determining what research was really needed. So how do we do this? We did this by conducting stakeholder interviews and a workshop to make sure that we were all on the same page with the rest of our team about what we knew and what we actually needed to find out. And we did this all before we dove into thinking about what research methodology made sense, what outputs made sense, and we also encouraged our stakeholders to stay in that moment and really focus on those key pressing questions as well, rather than the outputs that they may be hoping for. So what did we know? Just for background, our team at Spotify was called the Analytics Platform Team, and we built products for data practitioners internally within Spotify to discover, analyze, and tell stories visually with quantitative data. So we knew that data practitioners were the primary consumers of our analytics products. But we also knew that this was a very, very wide blanket term. It encompassed a wide range of users with very different needs and very different pain points. We also realized in this exercise that people across our team were using different terms to describe these users. We heard things like data practitioners, insights practitioners, data scientists, and it wasn't really clear what those terms were really encompassing, if they were similar or different from one another. We essentially did not have a shared language to talk about our users and refer to them across our team. And that leads us to, what did we aim to find out? What were our most pressing questions on our team? We aligned with our team that we really needed to understand who the data practitioners at Spotify were and how we could best meet their needs. We wanted to build a shared, formalized understanding of our users to really be able to identify any unmet needs, uncover how to build for the most important use cases, and prioritize features with the highest impact. And once we had that shared point of view, then we finally landed on personas to really help us get there, and we aligned on our research goals for really putting that vision into action. So our goals were to, 1, define and quantify the personas within the large blanket term of data practitioners at Spotify. We also wanted to identify our personas, going beyond things like title and role, and instead diving really deep into behaviors and motivations. And we also wanted to really build empathy with our users and create that shared understanding and language across our entire team. Our team did not have a very user-centric culture, and we were really on a mission with this work to be able to change that. And so what happened? Taking this approach of really focusing on those key questions before diving into methodology or output was a really big success. We knew that the research was going to be actually solving for some real needs for our team, and the work we did early on to really align with our team on those key pressing questions made sure that the insights would be used and impactful, and that they wouldn't just be sitting on a shelf unused, which is our biggest fear when it comes to some really large-scale foundational work like this that really takes up a whole lot of effort and time. We also knew that stakeholders, they were really engaged with our work throughout the entire research process. And once we came to formally sharing out outputs of this work, we had some really early advocates for the work who were really made building trust and acting on the insights a lot smoother for us. And this also really made sure that the work wasn't just seen as the research team's framework or the research team's language. Instead, this was knowledge that was shared and owned across our entire team, and it wasn't just our responsibility to make sure, as researchers, that the work was going to be acted on. It became the whole team's responsibility to make sure that we really acted on our insights here. Okay, so now that we have some stakeholder buy-in here, the second mistake that Luiza talked through was force-fitting traditional methodologies. So to avoid this, we instead allowed and even encouraged ourselves to be a little bit creative, to answer our questions through a custom approach that really was tailor-fit to our specific research goals. So again, based on the research goals that we aligned on with our team, we knew a few things. We knew that, 1, we needed a simplistic but rigorous approach. We needed that rigorous methodology that included a quantitative component to be able to size our personas. But we needed our approach to be simplistic. We knew from prior experience that for stakeholders, it can sometimes be difficult to really trust and work off of insights that are created from really highly complex black box methodologies that can be difficult to interpret. We also knew that we wanted to go beyond just demographics. We wanted our personas to be grounded in user behaviors, needs, motivations, and pain points to really make sure that they would build empathy and be able to inspire delightful products. So our first thought was, let's think about some traditional methodologies for developing personas. But in the end, we realized that they weren't exactly right for our specific research goals. So, for example, the first thing we considered were proto-personas. These are personas that are really based on stakeholder and teammates assumptions. These could be a really great starting point, but for us, they weren't based in enough evidence. So we continued down this path. What other traditional methodologies could we take a look at? We looked at qualitative personas. These are typically built from one-on-one user interviews. We nixed this approach because it didn't give us the ability to size personas, which we knew was a huge goal of this work after aligning with our stakeholders. We also considered more traditional quantitative approaches, things like survey and k-means clustering. This is something that uses survey and demographic data to really partition observations into a number of different clusters that become personas or segments. But that really lacked the depth we needed to build empathy, which was, again, one of our research goals that were really guiding our project here. And this is also a really complex black box methodology that can be really difficult for people to understand, trust, and ultimately remember. We could also consider a mixed methods approach, putting together the qualitative and quantitative approaches here, but that wasn't really right for our team's individual context, since we knew that survey data was really difficult to gather when it comes to internal teams. So none of these were really right for what we wanted to achieve for our specific goals. So rather than leaning on some more traditional methodologies, we came up with a different custom approach. And it had a few different parts to it. It had a qualitative element, moved to a quantitative component, and had more qual at the end. So let's dive into what we did. So we started with conducting one-on-one user interviews. I know, it's quite shocking to see 2 user researchers standing on a stage, walking you through a case study that talks about one-on-one user interviews. So we talked to users, and while synthesizing our interviews here, we found some key defining tensions that really defined a user's experience working with data at Spotify. These were things like technical proficiency, work variability, my work is highly or not highly variable, collaboration, and so on. These defining tensions really helped to create our first iterations of our personas. And as we were conducting user interviews, our data science partner led a quantitative piece. So now to the second part of our arrow here. She was exploring behavioral usage data of our interviewed users, and she was identifying patterns within that usage data to really add depth to what we were learning from our user interviews. She then scaled those findings to a larger user base, then going beyond the cohort that we were conducting interviews with. And these learnings really led us to create what we called our rules-based approach, where we began to develop straightforward data rules in plain English to really classify users into our groupings based on a mix of both qual and quant data. For example, of a data rule, a user who had contributed to pipeline changes in GitHub in the last 90 days may be more likely to belong to a certain persona grouping. So in short, we were working together between qual and quant to really marry the findings from our qualitative user interviews with the quantitative actual behavioral data to map straightforward data rules to the personas that were emerging. And after a few rounds of this, we realized that this was becoming an iterative, circular process. We continued to conduct user interviews to validate broad trends we were seeing, to add depth to our understanding of our emerging personas, while tweaking and refining our rules that would eventually classify our personas. So while we originally visualized this as an arrow in 3 different parts, it actually began to look something more like a circular, that iterative circle you see on the right-hand side of the page here, where we would conduct more qualitative interviews, and they'd result in either validation or tweaks to the proposed data rules that we were creating to classify our personas at scale. We kept going, integrating the qual and quant approaches until we were really confident in our personas that we built, the data rules that would classify them at scale, and our in-depth understanding of them from the qualitative interviews. And we ended up with our personas here. So we'd like to introduce you to Paul, the product strategist, Eli, the extensive explorer, Ivan, the influencer, Daryl, the data viz artist, Sigrid, the systems engineer, and Dahlia, the data dabbler. Our personas were easily understandable, they were memorable, trusted, and actionable, since they really had the right qual and quant depth that we set out to have. So what happened when we created these personas? This work became something that we were really proud of. They were really impactful. They ultimately became the foundation for how our team really understood its users. For example, this work led to the investment in building a unified analytics tool, which directly addressed workflow fragmentation, which was the largest pain point for our target personas that we identified from this work. So we directly impacted the product roadmap. This work also served as a widely adopted new foundation for metrics and goal setting to really help understand the health of our team. And lastly, the insights gave the team that shared, deeper understanding of who its users were and gave us all a common language to talk about and refer to our users, which really helped bridge that gap and build empathy. And it's worth noting that personas, they don't solve everything. They're not that silver bullet that answers all the questions that a team has. there were still a lot of open questions and still a lot of things that we wanted to investigate. But now we had a strong foundation of who our users were, shared by the whole team, and we could move forward from there. It was a great baseline that really set the stage for the team to become more insights-driven and user-centered. So now I'll pass it over to Luiza, who will talk through how we avoided the third mistake here, failing to time-proof outputs.
Thank you, Serena. So, to time-proof our outputs, we ensured our outputs were dynamic, not static, and could be revisited over time to evolve with the business. So those are two strategies I mentioned before when I was describing the mistake number 3. But what does that look like in practice? So in practice, in our team, this meant creating a persona artifact optimized for longevity. So our designers created those memorable persona illustrations that you've seen. They also had a Google site housing the key insights, since the slides can sometimes feel static and out of date. We also made Slack emojis so that people would see a post about a feature that was more focused on a persona and react with that persona. That was incorporated in our reading Slack discussions. The second way to time-proof outputs is to make them dynamic. So our data science created a self-serve dashboard tool that updated persona classification daily, ensuring that sizing remained up to date. So monitoring the persona sizes allow us to assess when we might need to tweak, continuing the circular process that Serena was describing. Another benefit of a dynamic output, like a dashboard, is that product can track metrics by personas themselves, and research can leverage that to recruit personas as a tool for future studies. We also revisited this persona last year, so that the original study happened about 2 years ago, and then the start of this year, we revisited our personas. So for context, the initial persona study was delivered was before Spotify acquired a new team who built a product for Spotifyers that are not data practitioner by profession, but do need to use data in their day-to-day, in their jobs. So this was a significant change in the business offering and user base. And as I mentioned in mistake 3, personas can become obsolete when they are frozen in time and no longer reflect your current users. So we adopted the same quali approach as in the first round, describing by Serena, but this time we were interviewing users who didn't classify in our original personas so that we could incorporate them with additional segments, which led to the evolved personas. We introduced Philip, the field optimizer, and Anna, the answer seeker, to the gang. We also made changes to Dalia, who now is called the data investigator. Our personas evolved with the business. We had a new focus, a new audience, so we made sure our personas reflected what they are now, our user base now, and they're still in use today, they're still relevant. So, you heard us speaking for 20 minutes now. Let's summarize our talk. What have we covered? Personas became controversial because they were built inconsistently, and to avoid making those mistakes, you want yourself to begin with understanding the most pressing questions, be creative to answer questions through a custom approach, and prioritize outcomes that are sustainable over time. We hope that our talk today has helped to bridge the divide in the usefulness of personas, making them a little bit less controversial. Thank you.